Catalonia, if you don't know, is a small region in the northeastern tip of the Iberian Peninsula. It's currently a part of Spain, and it's around about like there-ish. I say it's part of Spain, but it wasn't always that. It was its own independent state for a very long time, nearly 1,000 years. And it had worked out until under Philip V in 1714, I believe, when they were busy, conquering and slaughtering millions in South America. They decided, hey, why not just take this part of the land so close to us as well, because why not? So they forcefully, and after a very long and violent process, took Catalonia by military force, and it remained since then as Spanish. However, in the 30s, in 1936, what Catalonia is most famous for is that it actually took its independence from Spain back in 1936. But this is what I wanted to discuss today. That is the main point of Catalonia, that 36 revolution. Revolution, as the narrative goes, is often described as a military coup, and a violent coup, where the Catalonians, by force, and violence, took this land from the Spanish, which is wholly untrue. Catalonia is an anarchist community, I should say. That's very important to know. But Catalonia, the anarchist party, was voted in democratically in a democratic country. It's what the majority wanted. But during that time, Franco, the leader of Spain, who we all know it was an incredibly fascist dictator, didn't want that. So when this party, which had won an election and was rightfully taking its power, was about to go into place, Franco sent his full force of the army to gun down and bomb the shit out of the Catalonians, and then say that they started it, which is why they are seen as the bad guys, despite the fact that they only took up arms, because if they didn't take up arms, they all would have died very violently at the hands of one of the worst but practically unknown dictators of that period in European history. Like, everyone focuses on Hitler and Mussolini, but Franco was incredibly bad too. For a few years of Franco and his forces massacring the shit out of innocent Catalonians because they had won a democratic election, and for no other reason than him wanting to keep Catalonia as part of Spain, because he felt that powerful entitlement. They became semi-autonomous, which was just a fancy word to soothe it and keep them under Spain, which they were completely under Spain. And then fast forward a few years where they were unrightfully under Spain because Spain had forced them under them, to 2017, when Catalonia finally decided, okay, we'll have a referendum. The expected result of this referendum was that 90% of voters would have backed independence. So it would have definitely, if it had went to vote, they would have won. Catalonia would have been independent from Spain. But what happened was the biggest, I would say, covert false flag operation in Spanish history. Yeah, the Spanish police incited and began violence at all these polling stations across. They orchestrated these attacks on these polling stations so that they had an excuse to shoot and stop everyone from entering these. They violently stopped everyone from entering this the polling station, so no one could vote. They faked that protest was starting fights when it was really them shooting innocent people trying to vote. They literally shammed the election by not allowing anyone into the polling stations, so by shooting them all, basically, and beating the shit out of people just waiting in line to vote. Spain and the Spanish police there was no conflict before the Spanish police started kicking the shit out of people, and only 40% of people actually showed up, so they were stopping people from being able to vote. They would shoot people trying to go into the doors, and this was in 2017. This is recent. news for a day, and then everyone overlooked it, and then Catalonia became the bad guys again because they started the violence, which they didn't, and was just a narrative run by Spanish media. And if that sounds familiar, well, it is, because Hungary in 1956, one of the most condemned actions of the USSR was when the Red Army rolled into Hungary to prevent, was his name Nagy? I know his name was spelt like that, but I don't, Nagy or whatever, from coming into power. He was a slightly capitalist-leaning leader who was democratically voted in. So they rolled in and killed, I think, 2,000 people just because they didn't want him in power, despite the fact he was rightfully in power, which is incredibly condemned and is one of the reasons the USSR are seen as evil. But when the Spanish people do that, when the Spanish government, not the people, Spanish government does that 3 years ago, modern times, and we just look over it, Catalonia should not be a part of Spain because thrice, it has proven that the people want it to be independent, and it is only a part of Spain because of force and military force, especially, that have forced them to be there. And Spain want it because Catalonia is incredibly important to the the wealth and economy of Spain as a whole. It's where Barcelona is, if you didn't know. So it's a very valuable area. There's lots of money to be made there, so that's why they don't want to let it go. But they only have it. They shouldn't have it because they took it by force. When it was so close to declaring independence, they said no and shot the hell out of everyone, and then declared it to be an illegal election when it was entirely legal, entirely democratic. So basically, the Spanish government currently is a fascist sham running and just pulling bullshit. It is to the Catalonic people, they are oppressed, and it's so covert that we don't hear about it, but it's going on right now under our noses, and with this entire false narrative running where everyone thinks Catalonia are the bad guys, despite the fact that they are just trying to democratically get their own political parties into power. It's insane, and I don't see how Spain haven't been heavily criticised for this when it is literally, it is like the worst abuse of political power and police power. Yeah, that's just me ranting about Catalonia. Freedom to Catalonia. I hope they do get their independence because they worked as an anarchistic state for a while until, Franco started blowing the shit out of them. And everyone says, oh, anarchy doesn't work because it didn't work in Catalonia. But it did work until, you had the biggest fascist army outside of the war blowing the shit out of you, which is going to sort of hamper you. But yeah, so I hope they do get back together because if we can get Catalonia independent and we can get them to rerun their anarchistic beliefs and their state of anarchy, then perhaps that would be a huge step. Not perhaps, that would definitely be a huge step in just the political climate. If that we can have that and it works, and we can show that this does work. It was one of the top 2 successful anarchistic states, and one of the prime examples. Another one, I can't remember the name for the life of me, but it was out in the Middle East, and it worked really well until the US government had their armies who were fighting war against terror in the Middle East. One of those wars, again, bombed the shit out of it because of terrorists that weren't there. So, if you're seeing a pattern here, the capitalistic, fascist governments are have and are stifling all opposition, which we condemn the USSR so succinctly for when it is our European and American governments doing it. So what the fuck?